I knew something was wrong the moment I saw that little word etched on my locker. It read, Fago. The shock and bafflement was so instant that I couldn't help but wonder what idiot did not know the spelling of that simple word. But thinking about that was useless. Soon the shock and bafflement faded away. Fear and dread took their place. Suddenly, I was well aware of the weight of eyes on me. I finally knew why they were staring at me. It made sense why I heard a few giggles and snorts behind my back on my way. I pushed my books into the locker and snapped it closed. My movements both hurried and terrified. If one looked closely, they would see the trembling of my hands. This wasn't supposed to happen, I thought. This wasn't how I planned this to go. Suddenly, I wanted my friends around me. Before I could leave, however, I also couldn't help but notice the few zigzag lines etched over the word. If I had enough trust in the people around me, I would have thought someone had tried to erase that word, but couldn't. I grabbed my phone and texted Tao. I needed my friends. Because if I understood the eyes on me, things were only going to get worse from this point onwards.
Charlie?
It was Tao, and it wasn't the first time he had called my name. I had locked myself in one of the stalls in the washroom and wasn't sure if I wanted to see him. I knew I wanted to see him, but I wasn't sure if I wanted him to see me this way. Just yesterday, we were laughing and studying. Just yesterday, I had promised him that I would always be honest with him. I wasn't sure if I had the courage now.
Charlie, are you here? Let's talk. Well, what happened?
I opened the door and he peeked inside.
Oh, Charlie,
He said, and tentatively walked into the stall.
why are you crying? What happened? Has anyone said anything?
I shook my head and hugged him tightly. God, how safe he made me feel. It was always nice being around my friends. They know. He rubbed a hand over my head and locked the door behind him. I was worried that if someone noticed us coming out of the same stall, they'd misunderstood, but I didn't really have the energy to warn Tao about it.
What do they know?
They know about me being gay.
What? That's not possible. You never said anything.
I nodded. I don't know, Tao, but someone wrote faggot on my locker, and I know something's up. Tao stood still. It was clear he was just as baffled as me. I don't know if I could go to the class, I admitted. I wanted to go home and sleep away all these worries. Maybe it was just a nightmare.
You don't have to go, Charlie. I just don't understand how.
I don't know, I answered.
Have you talked to, Ben?
I hadn't even thought of texting him. I wasn't sure if he even wanted to know about it. We rarely met or talked, unless we wanted to meet or talk. I didn't want to message him right now when I wasn't even sure if he would answer. I told Tao I just wanted to go home. He patted my back and accompanied me to the bus stop and told me to call him whenever I needed to talk to someone. Until then, he would try to find out what had happened. I gave Tao an awkward smile and went my way. Tori was not home yet, and I was kind of glad. She'd know what was up. I sneaked into my bedroom, locked the door, and slept the better half of the day. I woke up to 2 texts from Ben and a few from Nick. I opened Nick's chat first, and as always, he was asking if I wanted to try out the rugby team. An hour later, he sent the message that Tao had informed him that I had left for home, and he wondered if I was all right. I was not all right, but I sent him a text, lying that I was just not feeling well. Now I am better, though, the second text read. I just hoped he'd buy it. Nick Nelson, a year 11 student, was from my form class. He was my partner and a popular rugby player. We met first through form, in fact. I still remember unconsciously smiling the moment I first saw him. It was just that, as Tao often said, he gave the golden retriever energy so much that it was impossible not to smile when he smiled. I liked interacting with him, but it wasn't until Tao had looked at me strangely and said,
Seriously? First that stupid bloke Ben, and now him?
that I realized I had developed a more than obvious crush on Nick. Nick was nice, kind, and he was tall. He was perfect. My phone pinged with a notification. Hurriedly, I opened it with the hope that Nick had texted back, but it was Ben. With a disappointed sigh, I clicked on Ben's chat. In his first message, he had asked us to meet in the library. I hadn't responded because, obviously, I couldn't. The next message came 10 minutes later, and he sounded pissed. Now, he was asking why I wasn't responding when I was online. Groggily, I tried to write an apology, but ended up not sending it. I didn't care, actually. I shut the phone, lay on my back, and stared up at the ceiling. Downstairs, I could hear my mom and Tori chatting, but their voices didn't help distract me from the issue at school. And, well, Ben. Ben Hope from year 11 was my boyfriend. Well, secret boyfriend was more like it. There was a time when I developed a serious crush on him. Although my friends said I could find a better man, I couldn't help but take the chance when it was first presented between us. Ben wasn't out either, and that seemed like a perfect arrangement. Obviously, that meant we'd sneak around a lot and kiss in the secluded corners of the school. But they seemed to work. Well, until I realized that Ben didn't even like associating himself with me. When I asked about it, he said that he was worried people would talk. While his worries made sense, I couldn't help but wonder if that would ever help us reveal our relationship to anyone at all. On top of that, it was this specific arrangement between us. We met only when Ben wanted to kiss me. It was incredibly flattering that he wanted to kiss me, but the fact that he met me only when he wanted to kiss me just bothered me endlessly. I'd often muse about that, but never told my friends, worried that I was intentionally looking for faults in Ben. It didn't feel right to do so. I heard knocks on my door and sat up on my bed. It was my mom.
Charlie, dinner's ready.
I didn't want to eat, though. I told her I had a headache, and I wanted to sleep.
I will make you something then,
She said.
maybe soup.
No, Mom, I don't want anything.
You cannot sleep on an empty stomach, Charlie.
I could, and I would prove that several times in the next week alone. Nick approached me first with a little hi. He was smiling, so I couldn't help but smile back. Tori had slinked away from my side, and I could hear Nick's teammates snickering behind his back. I grew conscious. Hi, I said, my smile now more tight-lipped. Nick's smile dropped, and he grabbed his bag before following me. Are you okay? I am fine, I replied, and kept my head low. I didn't want to be seen, even though I could feel eyes on me. So it was true after all. What I had seen yesterday wasn't just a bad dream. It had happened, and it had happened to me. Suddenly, I felt cheated and upset. I wanted to cry, but also fight. I hadn't done wrong to anyone, so why was I even in this position?
Are you sure? Nick asked. You don't look very well.
I am fine, I repented, and stood in front of my locker. The word was still there, though there were a few more crossed lines over it. A few more, and no one would know what was written there. I wondered who was behind it. I must have been staring at my locker for too long, because Nick cleared his throat and gave me one of his sunny smiles. I blinked and stared at him. I was aware of his eyes on me, but I felt shielded by them somehow. Whether it was Nick's broad frame or something else, I couldn't say, but I was glad he was near me.
Will you come to practice then?
I sighed. I will see, I replied. I wanted to be there, but also didn't want to be there. It was confusing playing this mental game with myself. Nick looked forlorn. I wanted to smooth away the frown between his eyebrows. Before I could let out another word, someone cleared their throat, and he turned around to find Ben standing behind me. I wasn't for sure if I was supposed to say hi to him. Ben had once chided me about it.
Nick,
Ben said.
Harry's looking for you.
He pointed a thumb in a direction.
Thanks,
Nick told him. He nodded at me and promised to see me in the class. I nodded and watched him leave. Ben walked away soon, but I received a message from him. He wanted us to meet in the library. I sighed and wondered if he knew. 10 minutes later, I was with Ben, just like always. He asked how I was doing. In the middle of my answer, he kissed me, and there went everything that I wanted to talk about. He awkwardly rubbed my hair and told me I should not interact so much with Nick Nelson. I furrowed my eyebrows. I have to, I answered. He is my partner, and I'm thinking of joining rugby.
Yeah, but why?
He said.
He's not a good guy, you see.
He is, I replied. Nick had never given me a reason to doubt him. Sure, my friends and I often discussed how we didn't really like Nick's teammates, but that was it. No, you will know he is not a good guy, he insisted. The bell rang. Before he could move away, I held the sleeve of his shirt and said I wanted to talk about something important, but I knew what he would say long before he shook his head and replied that we could talk later. He didn't want to be seen here with me, and I knew he would never talk about it again. After I returned to the class, Nick greeted me with a smile. His usual hi was in the right place, and I replied back the same way as I usually did.
Will you go for rugby today?
He whispered. I nodded with a small smile. I can give it a try. He smiled and patted my hand, and just like that, I couldn't understand why Ben hated Nick so much. But things weren't going to remain the same for several days to come. I wasn't sure whom to blame, but the rumors indicated that Nick might be a good start, because just like Ben had warned, some rumors started in the school soon. This rumor, however, was even more difficult to swallow. Not only it concerned me being forcefully outed by someone, but it also concerned Nick. In fact, if I had to believe the words, it was Nick who had outed me. The more I was pushed around and jeered at, the more I got upset. Not only was I hurt about Nick's possible involvement in this, but I was absolutely crushed. I didn't have the courage to confront him. No, I wasn't even sure if I would ever. But suddenly, looking at him made me angry. He had lied to me. He had hurt me. Just like Tao had said.
He's definitely like his dumb teammates.
As much as I hated to think that way about Nick, I didn't have a reason to not think about him like that. It was upsetting how he had spent the better half of the year pretending to be my friend, only to backstab me like that. Each time I walked into the class, he smiled at me as if he hadn't just done the worst possible thing to me. One day, when I got too frustrated and felt too hurt, I asked my teacher if I could change our seating arrangement. He clicked his tongue, muttering a low "nuh-uh" under his breath, and told me to tolerate it for the rest of the year. Nick seemed to understand I was upset. When I sat down and the voices around me seemed to fall into the background, Nick poked the back of my hand with his finger and asked if I was all right. I took a moment to answer. The upset I had been feeling until now seemed to reach my head. How dare he? How dare he act like he didn't just ruin it all for me? But then Nick rubbed his forefinger against my skin, and it seemed to calm me down. It was a strange thing, this influence that he had on me. It was like I was upset at him, but at the same time, couldn't for the life of me fathom him as a bad person.
Is everything all right, Charlie?
He asked again. I poked the inside of my mouth with my tongue. Yes, I answered with an effort. I wanted to confront him, but didn't have the courage to. Since the start of this year, my friends and Nick were the only reason I tolerated coming to this school. The class was over 25 minutes later. Before I could leave, Nick grabbed my hand. Suddenly, my anger towards him didn't make sense. I wondered if he was really behind it all. Surely if he had done that, he wouldn't be acting so friendly and nice, and just like himself even now. Nick always seemed like a genuine guy. Besides Tao and Isaac, he was the only one who hung out with me the most. Surely, not all of it was a lie.
Will you come out for rugby?
He asked.
You missed it yesterday, and the day before yesterday.
I don't feel like coming.
Okay,
he replied and squeezed my hand.
Charlie, if you ever need to talk to someone, I'm always here, all right? Just give me a message or a call.
I looked at our joined hands. Don't hold my hand like that, I said. They'll think you like the nerdy gay boy.
What?
He muttered, sounding both shocked and surprised. I pulled my hand from his and walked out of the class. Nick had held my hand in front of so many students. Was he really behind it all? But people around me said his name for a reason. They said Nick knew it. I arranged a meeting with Tao and Isaac. Elliot said she couldn't come, so I decided to talk to my friends in the school instead. Before I could meet my friends in the cafeteria, I was once again cornered and shoved against the wall by a group of guffawing students. I knew better than to confront them. The last time I confronted them, they slapped me. Their disparaging tone as they hissed, "Stupid gay boy, keep your dirty mouth shut," still played in my head.
What happened?
Tao asked, my most protective friend of the three. Nothing, I just stumbled into the wall.
Really?
He asked, and pointed at the little scratch on the side of my neck.
Who was it, Charlie? Tell me the names. I will make them.
It's all right, I replied. It's not serious. I hit the scratch and steered the conversation away from it. Tal was protective and dangerous when angry. He would end up getting in more trouble. My concern was obviously Nick. When I informed my friends of what I was thinking, they nodded.
I don't understand. How did Nick know about it?
About what? I asked.
About you being gay.
I had skipped school thrice by now. Thanks to my older sister, Tori, my family knew what was up with me at school. At least there was one good thing about it. They didn't force me to go to school, but that didn't mean they didn't bother me about food. Though it wasn't until yesterday that I realized I had been avoiding eating as well. I didn't think that was bad, though, because although I was hungry, it was tolerable. Soon, I knew my body would get used to it, and then I wouldn't have to worry about feeling hungry either. In the last few days, I had received several messages from Nick, all ranging from concerned to worried. No doubt he knew that I knew. I hadn't checked his latest messages. I was worried I would end up replying. The door opened and Tori called my name. I immediately grabbed the blankets and draped it over my legs. It would be a mess if she noticed what I had done. What? I asked.
Come eat dinner.
I am not hungry.
Mom said you haven't eaten since morning.
She walked inside the room and leaned against the door.
You're going to get sick if you don't eat.
I will eat when I am hungry.
You're hungry. You have just decided not to eat.
It annoyed me that she was right. I pulled a blanket over myself and pointed at my phone. Tal told me there's a party, I said. I am going to the party. Although it was true that there was a party, I decided not to go. Yesterday, my friends came over to my place and suggested I attend it. It was the general consensus that it would help me relax a little after weeks of torture at school. After all, it wasn't like my life was only going to be about this. Someday the students at school were bound to get over it. Something new would come up, and they would forget all about me. I just couldn't wait for the day. It would be nice to skip to that day.
And?
I shrugged. If she kept bothering me, I wouldn't have any other option but to go.
Charlie, how about I make you a sandwich?
I knew she wouldn't leave until I agreed, so I reluctantly said yes.
A glass of milk?
No, just a sandwich. She smiled.
You'll have it.
I texted Tao and asked him if I was still invited.
This is why I tell you to prepare in advance,
Tao said.
This is the only decent one I could find.
Ellie showed me a mask and dropped it on my lap. The party had a theme. Either you dress up as one of your favorite characters from a book, or grab a mask from the party. Then you'll have to go and find your partner, then dance. That was what the party was about. It was ridiculous and required too much energy and social interaction. I was worried it would end in disaster.
Now that you've come,
Ellie said,
you cannot leave.
I'm pretty sure you'll find your Romeo.
Tao patted my back in mock sympathy. I don't want to, I replied. I am sick of hoping so much. I morosely picked up the mask and glared at it. I could have instead stayed at home and tolerated Tori's nagging. That would have been easier.
It has to get better someday, Charlie,
Ellie said.
Let's go now.
And that was how I ended up with my Romeo of the day, Nick Nelson. Now, I would like to be clear. The lights were dim and the music was insanely loud. It was impossible to know anyone without touching them. When the dance finally started, I knew something was up. The touch felt familiar. In fact, if I could be bold enough to admit it, I even craved it. But it wasn't until the beat dropped that I realized it was Nick. Upset at letting my feelings overcome the actual issue, I removed myself from his hold and left the floor. Tao and Ellie were probably somewhere on the floor, dancing with each other, as I had seen them the last time. I didn't want to disturb them, so I removed myself from the crowd and looked for a more secluded corner. It was not hard to find one. Most people were dancing, but I was thinking so loud that I didn't notice Nick stalking behind me and stopping only to whisper a small,
Hey Charlie, are you okay?
I wasn't, and I told him so.
Have I done something?
He asked, sounding incredibly devastated. I don't know, Nick, have you?
I don't understand, Charlie. Why are you upset at me?
There's no way you don't know why." He closed his mouth and looked at me for a moment.
Do you really believe that?
"Am I not supposed to?" I shouted. I was sure I was probably crying too. For weeks now, things have been absolutely worse for me. Ever since it came out, people have been acting like I have done something incredibly wrong, and I don't understand why. I thought it was still tolerable. It has to stop someday, but now they're saying you did it, and you want me to not doubt you?
I haven't done anything,
Nick replied. He looked desperate and sincere. Nick, everyone's saying it was you,
and I am telling you my side of the story. I haven't done anything, Charlie.
I didn't even know about you being gay. Suddenly, the last bit scared me. Did he too hate the fact that I was gay? Did he feel disgusted?
Charlie, I don't think there's anything wrong with being gay,
he clarified before I could think of another word against him.
I never knew you were gay. It's not possible for me to have done that. I promise.
He carefully reached for my hand. The way he moved again forced me to think about everything.
You're one of my few friends in the entire school, Charlie. I like you,
he confessed, and he sounded sincere about it. I wasn't sure if it was a romantic confession or a friendly one, but it warmed me nonetheless. When he brought a hand to rub the tears off my cheeks, I wanted to hug him. For whatever reason, it felt so right being next to him. At this moment, I had nothing against him.
You're my friend. I will never do anything to hurt you.
But I must have looked doubtful still, because he stepped back.
If I've done something like this, I wouldn't have ever dared to show you my face, Charlie. I promise you, I have done nothing like this. I will never wrong you.
Then, he was gone. Soon after the party, I informed my friends about the little interaction between us. Just like me, they reacted in the same manner. Obviously, we were already doubtful of Nick's involvement in the entire situation, but the more I interacted with him, the less sure I felt about Nick being behind all the mess. There's no way he could be behind it all, we agreed. But if not him, then who? When I thought about it, there were only a few people who knew about my sexuality. My family, my friends, and Ben. There was no way anyone from my family would have betrayed me, and it was the same belief that I held for my friends too, so by process of elimination, it couldn't be anyone other than Ben. Despite my friend's skepticism, I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. As far as I knew, Ben didn't have a reason to do that. He was gay too, and closeted, just like I was. But there was a lack of any other explanations. I contacted him and told him that I needed to talk about something important with him. Each time, Ben gave me random excuses. He either had an extra class or he had to go meet someone. He wouldn't even meet me outside the school grounds. Even though that was typical Ben behavior, I couldn't help but feel doubtful. Then, as things would have it, Tao overheard a bunch of Year 11 students talking about the situation. It was a 5-second long conversation, Tao said, but he was sure he heard one of the guys asking another, "Isn't it suspicious Ben knew about that gay boy, but no one else?" As if these rush of emotions weren't enough, a few days later, the school announced a camping trip. By luck, Nick and I ended up sitting beside each other on the whole trip. Thankfully, that didn't make things worse between us. If anything, things only got better between us. It was past 10, and we were still hours away from our destination. Half of the students had either fallen asleep or were busy watching movies. Nick was scrolling through his phone, but I knew he wasn't actually doing anything. It was mindless scrolling, just like I was mindlessly staring outside the window. When I couldn't hold it in anymore, I looked at him. He immediately found my eyes. "I'm sorry," I began. "I think I have made a mistake." He chuckled and leaned against the seat.
"We all do,"
he said. He didn't look upset. I think I was cornered. I didn't want things to go this way ever. Suddenly, I was out, and they said it was you. I didn't know what to believe. I didn't believe them, but I was scared to believe you too.
You were worried that you'd been wrong to believe in me,
he finished. I nodded. I was ashamed, but it didn't feel like he was shaming me. If anything, it was almost like he was glad that I was talking to him. The thought brought an unconscious ease in my body. I was suddenly glad we were sitting next to each other. "I guess," I agreed, "but I do not think it was you, Nick." He softly smiled at me.
I would never do that to you, Charlie, he said. What happened was wrong. It was your decision to make and not someone else's. I promise if I ever get involved, it would be to find you a nice boyfriend.
I gave a small laugh. Did you know I wanted him as my boyfriend? I didn't know what to reply, but when I felt his eyes on me, I turned to find Ben looking at us. I knew Ben was somehow involved in it. When we arrived at the destination, the chance presented itself. Ben was in the public washroom when I walked up to him to ask him to tell me the truth. He looked spooked for a while and hissed at me for sneaking up behind him, and what if someone found us together? Even though I was smaller than him, I didn't allow him to move. I wanted answers. Tell me what really happened, Ben.
The whole school already knows. What else do you want to hear?
The truth, I said. I know Nick didn't do anything.
And how do you know that?
He hissed.
Did he kiss you and promise that?
Shut up, I said. Tell me what really happened, Ben. He clenched his jaw and looked at the closed door. There was no way this should have worked, but he sighed and crossed his arms.
Fine, he said. I did it.
Why did you do it? What Ben said sounded so ridiculous. I wanted to punch him in the face. He said that he was worried that I had taken a liking to Nick Nelson. It made him jealous, he said, that I could talk to Nick in public and not Ben. It was so stupid, because the only reason Ben and I never interacted out of those little secluded corners was because of him. He then proceeded to admit that another reason he said that was because he was sure if Nick found out about me being gay, he would distance himself from me out of disgust. But the plan had backfired, and he was pissed.
He is still lumbering around you, he said. It's pissing me off.
You disgust me, Ben, I said. I couldn't understand him at all. Ben didn't want to be publicly seen with me, and he had the audacity to ruin my friendship with Nick, even though there was nothing going on between us. It was true I'd developed a crush on Nick, but I never made a move on him while being in a relationship with Ben. I often compared them, but I believe that was only natural. Everyone desired a good partner, and I was no different. Angry at the situation and at Ben, I told him that I never wanted to see him again and ran out of the washroom. I walked in the opposite direction from where I knew the rest of my school was at. I hoped I wouldn't find anyone, but I ended up stumbling into Nick. He let out a huff sound and held me around my shoulders to steady me.
Hey, are you okay, Charlie?
I did not look. I was crying, and I was sure my face was as red as a tomato, but all I could answer was a simple, Ben did it, I told him. He was my boyfriend, and he did that to me. How could he?
Ben was your boyfriend?
I nodded against his shoulder. I hadn't done anything wrong, Nick. He rubbed a hand over my nape.
It's all right. Let it out.
And, well, I did. I eventually told Nick about my relationship with Ben. He sounded surprised that we had been dating, but he didn't sound as surprised to find out he was gay. When I asked him, he shrugged a little. Honestly, I think a few people have their suspicions about him. We have seen him checking out guys, but none of us were sure. He always tried to act so straight. He always hung around with one girl or the other. Kissed those. Oh.
He used to kiss them?
Nick swallowed. Clearly, he had let it slip at such a tender moment, but he still nodded.
If I knew he was dating you, Charlie, I would have done something to stop him. But yes, I am sorry.
I shook my head. I couldn't care less about that. I was done with that guy. Nick gave me his handkerchief and brushed back the bangs from my eyes. He was so tender with me that I almost wanted to kiss him, and if I understood his emotions right, perhaps he wanted to do the same. But the time wasn't right, and I didn't want to push my luck any more than I already had. The day had turned out bad, and Nick had solved much of the trouble by his simple touches. As much as I craved his touch more, I was sure I didn't want anyone to see us in any compromising situation. I didn't want Nick to go through what I had. But the conversation between us wasn't done. Soon, it moved to the situation at school. So when Nick asked about how I was doing, I couldn't help but tell him. By the end of it, he sounded and looked mad.
I will have them kicked out of the team,
he promised. But Nick...
No, Charlie, that's not how a civilized person behaves.
He looked so passionate. I couldn't help but drop my head on his shoulder. The touch seemed to startle Nick, but instead of pushing me away, he cradled the back of my neck and asked if I wanted to take a nap. It was then that we realized it had gotten dark, and we had missed our bus. We had rushed out of that area and stopped in front of the place where everyone was gathered. How was it possible for them to miss us? We looked at each other and couldn't help but start laughing. It was ridiculous. Why is it always us?
I don't know,
He replied with a small laugh.
but I am glad we are together.
He grabbed his phone and sighed.
No signal.
We can walk a little, I suggested.
Yeah.
He nodded and gave me his hand. Let's go and find someone. We ended up finding a small shop. We used the telephone and called my mom. She promised she'd be there soon. Nick, in the meantime, brought us some snacks, and we sat on one of the benches. I am not hungry, I told him.
No way,
He said and shook his head.
I didn't see you eating in the afternoon. It's practically night now.
I will still pass,
Okay.
he said, and slowly nodded. It was almost as if he seemed to understand what was going on. Nervously, I rubbed my bony wrists together and made sure my sleeves hid everything unsightly. I didn't want him to run away from me.
What about a sandwich?
He suggested.
You can eat half, and I can eat the other half.
That didn't seem like a big task. When Nick looked like he wouldn't relent, I tentatively grabbed one half of it.
That's good,
He said, encouraging me.
Cold drink?
I shook my head. Water is enough,
All right.
he said, and gave me some space to eat in silence. He probably didn't want to infringe more on me. I was glad, but also a little nervous. The sandwich seemed heavy.
Is it good?
He asked. I nodded. It's nice. It was nice. It was nice because it was with him. Thankfully, the camping trip had done good for Nick and me. My friends couldn't stop laughing when I told them what had happened, and Isaac said it was probably for the best. I looked at Nick and thought, yeah, definitely for the best. Things had gotten better between us. Although there was a little awkwardness, I could easily admit we were quickly moving past that. It helped that Nick liked being around my friends just as much as I did. One day, when we invited Nick for a sleepover in the absence of my parents, he said yes. I firmly believed it was that day when my friends accepted him as one of us. Nick probably got their green signal then. When things were going so well between us, I expected it to stay that way. Nick being with me helped my case. The bullying had stopped to a large scale, and people kept their distance from me. I believed it was probably because no one wanted to mess around with Nick. Whatever the reason may be, I was glad it was working. Then Ben had to poke his nose where it didn't belong. I was waiting for Nick outside the school premises when Ben cornered me. He looked desperate, but still aware of our surroundings. When I angrily told him to leave me alone, he grabbed my wrist, the one that had a fresh cut on it, and dragged me into a more secluded corner. Ben, get away, I said.
Charlie, he said, please listen to me. I am sorry. Come back.
I shoved him away. I will not. I am done with you.
You cannot do this to me,
he said, and came closer to press kisses on my face. He was taller and bigger than me. Although I tried to pull myself away from his touch, it was a struggle. But his touch was insistent, and if it wasn't for the sudden presence of Nick, I was sure he would have actually kissed me. Nick shoved him and settled between us. When Ben tried to speak, Nick warned him to stay silent.
You come close to him again, I promise it will not end well for you.
Fuck you,
Ben replied.
You can't stop me.
Even then, he rushed away from there. When he was gone, Nick turned to me. Before he could ask his usual question, I draped myself over him and felt his arms around me. It was the easiest way to feel safe. I was not crying, but I was in shock. When Nick rubbed a hand over the back of my neck, I was glad he was still around me. I didn't know what I would have done if he hadn't come.
Charlie,
He said.
everything's all right.
I am glad you're here, I said. He had taken one of my hands on his own. I observed the size difference, and then held his hand tighter. It felt so nice being around him. I wonder if he would like to be my boyfriend. The next morning, without my saying anything, Nick stood up on one of the empty benches in the cafeteria and grabbed everyone's attention. Tao, Isaac, and I were standing in the corner. We wondered what he was up to.
Guys, can I have your attention, please? He said. Why is it difficult for some of us to respect other people? It shouldn't matter to you or to me what someone is doing in their personal life, as long as they're not hurting someone. It shouldn't matter to us who they're kissing or sleeping with. That's none of our business. As a matter of fact, we should leave them be. We are allowed to live our lives the way we want, regardless of what anyone else tells us. Loving someone of the same sex isn't wrong, and it's time we all come to terms with it. If you cannot respect someone, don't hurt them. It goes for everyone. Please keep your hurtful words to yourself before it's too late. That's all I have to say.
He patted the backs of a few teammates of his before he reached us. It was a warning, and we knew that, even though he didn't say anything. Tao and Isaac smugly smiled at me, and Nick followed us out of there. His hand touched mine a few times, and I couldn't help but recall that old conversation with Tori, where I admitted I wanted to be with someone who wasn't ashamed to be seen with me. The end. Nick and Charlie's romance seems to have just started. How's it going with yours? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.